Okay, folks, not sure why that little object was there. Okay, just a couple of things. First of all, I just want to introduce really where we're going to go with this today. And obviously, we're looking at developing exam skills, but I'm going to sort of focus on skills in general, okay? So I'm going to take you through a 3-step process here. I'm going to talk about analysing, I'm going to talk about planning, I'm going to talk about delivering, okay? That's what we're talking about in this particular context. So I'm going to focus in this very first mini section on analysing our course to understand clearly what this sort of skill set, including the exam skills here, what those skill sets are. So with that in mind, I just want to go to this sort of analyse perspective. And by the way, let me just go back. I could also, of course, include a review of the deliver back to the plan and the analyse, of course. But let's just go to here. We're thinking about analysing our course. Why are we doing that? Well, how are we doing that? First of all, we're looking to analyse the PE data centre for exam skills. So what I've done, folks, is I've logged into the platform here. And just remember, your PE data centre will be available to you. We looked at this in the previous webinar if you haven't taken that one. But we looked at the PE data centre as part of the exam part of the platform. Now, for example, if I was to go into AQA A-Level PE Paper 1 or any of our other courses, choose your own qualification, once I'm into this space, I can start to analyse what the exam skills are. Now, the most obvious thing I can do is go to the summary of the skills, click into here, and it will tell me really, really clearly that on average, these are the skills that are most commonly assessed on this particular exam. So for example, I can look at identifying, defining's in there, describing's in there, explaining's in there, but none of those things come close to analysing and evaluating, which very, very clearly indicate to me now, as the person doing this research, that these are going to be absolutely fundamentally critical skills for my students to be aware of, to be capable and competent with, and to be able to differentiate also, and I'll come back to that point in a few moments. Furthermore, folks, we can go back to sort of our dashboard here and we can say, okay, what sort of mark distribution do they get in these kind of assessments here? And you can see very, very clearly what we've got here. Oops, didn't mean to do that. What we've got here is yes, we get 1 markers. Yes, we get 2 markers, but not much. Yeah, 3 markers are pretty pivotal. 4s are important, but again, nowhere near the importance of our 8 and 50 markers. Now, those of you that teach this course will know that on paper 1, you get 3 lots of these and 3 lots of these, hence 24 and 45 marks. It's fairly obvious. But what we can start to think already is that if we are preparing our students in the skills of analyse and evaluate in the context of the knowledge of the course, and we are doing lots and lots of, let's call it essay writing practice, let's call it under time restricted conditions practice, we are going to be moving our students closer and closer to the actual assessment skills that they're going to be working with. I'll come back to that again in a moment. Now again, I just want to dip out here, and with that in mind, I just want to remind you that any time you want to, you can go into your paper 1 or whichever paper you're looking at, and you can look at how different topics are distributed specifically. Now, a great thing to do is look down the AO3 column in this case and look for topics that are commonly included in analyse and evaluate skills, and you can start to pick out, look, factors affecting VO2 max as an example is often an analyse and evaluate skill. A lot of the marks, in fact the majority of the marks, the biggest proportion of the marks, I should say, come from that space. I'm doing that analysis, okay? So the data centre allows us to pick out those things. Secondly, folks, we need to think about other skills. It's not as easy, and I'm going to go into examples today, but it's not as easy as just saying, okay, analyse, evaluate, 8 and 15 markers or whatever the equivalent is on your particular course. We also need to look at the other skills a student is going to need to display in order to be able to achieve that. So here's one. They need to present and speak. Now that could come, now it depends on the nature of our coursework, thinking about OCR A-level, potentially AQA A-level. They can do coursework here with a sort of a spoken oral assessment. Those of you on OCR A-level, everyone's favourite EAPI, of course. But notice, this is an other skill that we need to be developing and structuring our course. Of course, they need to be developing writing skills. It's a great question to ask oneself. Are we supporting our students to write well? Are we supporting them to structure great sentences, great paragraphs, great conclusions? Obviously, the evaluate skill. Notice here, I'm saying that part of that is note-taking. This is another skill that our course must be, by definition, developing our students. We're also looking for them to time manage effectively, to write essays, and of course, when it comes to often AO4, we want them to be able to perform skills and compete in their chosen activity or activity. This, in essence, is the skill set of our course. And we have to start asking ourselves, how are we building those skills? And of course, if I go back one here, when in the next section I'm going to focus then, if you're analysing these things and bringing these out. By the way, I should have made reference there. One of the ways we would do this, I'm using EQA as my example, I would go through the actual skill set of the specification. If I go here to the assessments, I can see pretty coherently what is going to be expected of my students. I'm seeing here that they're doing multiple choice short answer and extended writing, same in paper 2. I can see here that they are doing written and verbal analysis of performance. They are assessed as a performer or coach. I can build that skill set into the plan of my course, and I'm going to come back to that in a few moments' time. So, guys, just to summarise this first section, we're looking at the model of analyse the course, plan for it and deliver it, and of course a reflection and review built in. And when we're talking about analysing, folks, we are talking about the data centre for the exam skills. Go back to previous webinar, but we must identify other skills, because if our course is not developing those other skills, we are not preparing our students for assessment. I know that sounds strong, but I'm saying anyway. Finally, folks, notice this one. I opened the blog just briefly. Now, again, our blog is utterly free to you. If you just search the word skill, for example, in here you will see loads and loads. I'll just read through them for you. P theory lesson skills check. Ignore this one because it's about classification of skill. It's a content one. How to make command word your strategy. How I get my students evaluating part 1, part 2, common misconceptions, etc., etc., etc. Questioning techniques. If I was to go into this one, for example, it sounds like it's about questioning techniques, right? But notice what I've got here. I've got questioning techniques like, let's go for this one, for example. This is built specifically on the evaluate skill, and I talk about it in this process. So I am writing commonly about this skill development. If I just go back there, many of these articles are there about skill development in classrooms, specifically in combination with theory studies. So I'm just going to pause there and we'll have a quick discussion about that, and we'll come back when we're looking at the planning phase. Well, that was a bit of an emergency because one microphone just failed completely. So I apologise for that. I just thought we'd just jump into it and go, and then we managed to switch the other microphone back on. So apologies for that false start. I was meant to do a whole introduction, but I just thought, well, it's not working, so we'll jump into it. By way of an introduction, after some of the content, hello, I'm James. Nice to meet you. We've got Marta here as well, who's with us. Wonderful. And a couple of things I just want to say. Please do post your questions and comments, especially if you're live, obviously, into the live chat, which is on the sort of the webinar hub page and what have you.
I don't think
There's there is sound, Marta. Are you sure?
I can't hear it. I was hearing. Oh, it's very quiet.
It's very quiet. Okay, so apparently it sounds very quiet, guys. So I'm gonna. Wow, I'm so sorry. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to speak really loud.
Yeah.
I think that's my best methodology at the moment. I'm going to speak really loud because the technology, I'm meant to be good at this stuff, the technology is not quite working. Is that a bit better for you when that ends? So we're going to talk really loud and do it this way. Now, rest assured, when we go into those little, sort of teaching elements, I'm using a different microphone, so that's absolutely fine. But what I was going to say was, do post questions to us. We'll answer those questions. I'll see if I can sort out the other mic as well. Secondly, folks, I forgot to ask this in webinar 1. If you'd be kind enough to hit like and maybe even subscribe on the YouTube, we'd really appreciate it. Those little things actually make quite a giant amount of difference to us. So do consider that. And finally, folks, I really want you to think about these exam skills that we're talking about here. I sometimes feel like I'm banging this drum a bit too often. And the other thing I felt in preparation of this particular session today was, out of the 4 webinars I'm going to do this year, it's the most sort of theoretical. It's the one that I feel I'm handing over the practical things least, but I want to get those principles across to you because I think they actually matter. I feel in the first half of my career that I was a content teacher. And I think I've addressed that much better in the latter half of my career so far. And I've become much more coherent. And I'm going to show you some examples of that later on. Yeah, so that's where we are with that. Anyway, I hope that first little section has been useful. Any questions from you at this point, Marta?
Yes.
Loud as well.
Yes, I am trying to be really loud. James, do you correct grammatical structures in students' writing, and do you encourage them to use bullet points in their writing?
By the way, I think our input volume will be better now because I've just changed the setting.
Okay.
So hopefully that will come through. So can I clarify? So Mark just asked me there whether I will actively correct students' writing, not just content. So sentence structures, paragraph structures, conclusion structures, and also, did you say bullet points there?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a really interesting one. Numerous courses will credit students for writing bullet points as exam answers, and the exam board has deemed that that's appropriate. If you want to do that, do it. Is that better sound-wise? By all means, do that. That's absolutely reasonable. However, I will never ever do it, because for me, one of my core responsibilities to these young people is to help them to develop the writing skill. Now, you might think that is idealistic or utopian. Sorry, but that is what I am. Okay, I can't see an unstructured, poorly structured sentence or paragraph or concept or misuse of verb and not correct it. That is who I am. And therefore, I'm going to develop that with the students personally. So yes, I would do it that way. I have had occasions, I remember in the pre-2016 AQA level course, we did use bullet points at times in that one. Some of you will have taught that, but I haven't done that since. And I wouldn't do that in the future unless there was a specific purpose. I want to develop that writing skill in the student. I believe I owe that to them. How can I, as an educator, see that they could write better and not correct it? That would be something I couldn't do. Is that okay?
Okay.
All right, so we had a look at that analyse part now, guys. I want to jump in to this sort of more planning and what we're going to do. This will be very, very sort of rapid, and then we'll get into some examples, okay? Sorry about the microphone mess up, folks. Hopefully this will work neatly for us. Just bear with me. So, folks, I've already been talking about analysing, planning and delivering our courses, and I've taken you through how we might go about some analysis work for our actual individual courses. But really, very quickly, this is what I believe planning looks like for developing exam skills and, air quotes, those other skills I referenced before. We need to be asking ourselves as course planners, as A-level GCSE, BTEC, Cambridge, whatever teachers, we need to be asking ourselves this primary question. Here it is, folks, in big, bold white. How are you? How am I planning the following to achieve the skills we have analysed? So we have to ask ourselves, what is our course structure and does it promote these skills? What about our core P and extracurricular that surrounds and perhaps supports our examination courses? Now, there's some sensitivity around that, but that's important. What about the actual learning resources that we are producing? Are they developing those specific skills that we're working with? What about our assessment resources and structures here? Now notice I've got a little asterisk next to these. There's no reason why these two things can't be one and the same. I write about this quite commonly, but anyway, thinking about assessment resources, structures, these could involve exam practice, mock exams, end of unit tests, spot testing, retrieval practice, etc., etc. What about our lesson activities and our homework structures? Are they promoting the skills we have identified? If they are not, then they will not have the impact that they could have if indeed they had been. And finally, folks, and I'm going to touch on this a lot in the last section, thinking, writing and speaking skills. Can we be confident as educators, as teachers, as PE teachers, that we are developing the capacity in our learners to perform these things, not only because they are on the assessment and they're going to get the marks, air quotes, but because this is the right thing to do from a holistic educational perspective. We are to go back to analysing and evaluating. We're going to talk about that with AQA A-level again in a second. Those skills are important in an AQA A-level PE, fine, but they're important in life. And we have got a responsibility, in my opinion, to build those as part of our qualification structure. Now, that's a very quick blast from me on this one. I'm going to come back onto the camera just briefly before we look at some of my actions of how we, if I just go back here, how we'd actually deliver this. What would this actually look like if we're actually doing it? So just give me a moment, we'll come back onto the screen and we'll discuss it briefly before we look to implement it. Okay, so nice and compact, nice and hopefully this sounds okay. We haven't changed microphones from the one. We're literally on the machine microphone. It's a bit tinny, apologies. But look, I just want to get to the point there. It's really asking the question, are we reflecting on the types of experiences we're giving based on that analysis that we've put before? And that, if nothing else, is a great thing to come out of this particular session with. I realise that some of these are bigger questions. I will go into some examples of doing that here. Anyway, questions, Marta? Anything you wanted to ask?
Yes. What do you mean by thinking, writing, and speaking skills?
Okay, so we often focus on writing skills as teachers, PE teachers, exam preparing PE teachers, classroom-based PE teachers, and that's right. We'll be thinking about explaining and describing and justifying and evaluating and analysing, whatever it happens to be. We will be developing those skills with our students. But those writing skills come from thinking first. And I want to give you a couple of expressions of that. When we develop in our lesson activities, I'm going to talk about this a bit more in a second, but when we develop in our lesson activities the behaviours of justifying, of evaluating, of analysing, of explaining, we can hear that in the students, what we'd call linguistic predicates. Is that a reasonable term?
Not sure.
Anyway, I'm going to use it. Linguistic predicates are ways that we can use the students' words to understand the way their thinking process is going on. So let me give you an example. I might teach here on a whiteboard, and I might teach all about the aerobic system or the phosphocreatine system, or I might teach something about the history of sport, Tom Brown's school days, first stage of evolution and development of sport in public schools, whatever. I'm teaching that. If I get the following question from a student, I know the frame they are thinking in. A student might say to me, "Sir, could you tell me or James, could you tell me exactly why we consider that to be true?" They are looking for an explanation, a justification, even an evaluation. What about this one? "James, has anyone argued to the contrary of that psychological theory of arousal or aggression or whatever? Does anyone not agree with Dollard and Berkovitz? Has anyone said anything different to that? What are the weaknesses of that theory?" When the students talk like that, they are in this case, the evaluative frame. What about this one? "Sir, how do I break that down into different parts?" What skill is that? The analyze skill. They are analyzing a graph, data, a concept. That's what they're doing. So we can use those linguistic predicates that the students are using, and we can explore whether they are thinking in those frames. If we don't get those types of statements, those types of questions from our students, we can be absolutely confident that they are not thinking in those frames. That means that their writing in those frames will be weaker because the thinking comes before the writing. Okay, the writing is the production. It's the productive aspect. As speaking would be, I'm producing. I am producing based on that thinking pattern. Now, I know I realise this feels a little bit sort of theoretical and stuff, but like, reflect on the questions and the comments you're getting back from your students. When was the last time someone said to you, "So, what's the other side of this argument? What's your opinion?" You've said positive and negatives, James. How would you bring that together? What would be your overall judgment? Do you see how that thinking leads to writing? So how do we build that thinking in our students? And that's what we're going to go on to a little bit in this last little section. That makes sense, Marta?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I just feel sometimes like, and I'll touch on this here, I just feel sometimes like lessons, including mine by the way, just feel sometimes like they are specialised in the teacher delivering ideas and concepts and content. And that's fine. We need to do that. But that isn't how the students are going to be assessed. They're going to be assessed by the way they think and produce that thinking into writing or speaking. Therefore, in my opinion, we have to structure that into lessons. Mm-hmm. Okay, any other points before we do this last little section?
No.
Right, folks, let's transition into this last little bit. I'm hitting the canvas hard, getting the digital pen out for a bit. Hopefully this will work.
Do you want to just remind people that they can use the chat if they've got questions?
Yes, chat is available. Do ask questions if you have them. Thank you for those of you who asked so far. Here we go. So we've got an opportunity here to look at a specific example. And just for continuity, I'm talking about AQA A-level PE here, and obviously other qualifications could be our example, and you've got your data centres for those. But what I want to draw attention to here is just the obvious in many ways. If I'm working with AQA level PE, first of all, I'm identifying that my analyse and, whoops, that was not what I meant to do. I think I've chosen a white colour, there we go, that my analyse and my evaluate skills are by far the most significant. But of course, we're looking at sort of identifying as well. We've got some describing in there. We've got some explaining in there. These are relevant for me to be considering when I'm thinking about the various different aspects of learning, and I'm going to talk about those in a second. The other thing, and again, just to reiterate this point, folks, notice that over here, I'm really looking at my, looking at my 8s and my 15s as the big wins here. 15 markers is where success is in these courses. 8 markers, secondary to that. So obviously a significant proportion of my provision needs to be focused on these. Do we want to make everything assessment focused and just do? No, we don't just want to do essays. We want to teach and we want to encourage and we want to guide, but we've got to do that in the context of making sure the kids are assessment ready. Now, one other factor I'm going to consider, and this is part of data center, hopefully it's fairly legible for you on the screen here. I just want to draw your attention as well to the nature of the paper, which again, we can sort of extract from that data center. First of all, if I look in what we call section A here, at the first 4 questions there, we have basically AO1 and AO2 being detailed. Now, I can be working with students with lots of exam assessment materials, lots of sort of explanations, lots of facts, a lot of definitions, a lot of retrieval. I can be doing that. But once we get into sort of question 5 to 7, or the final 3 questions, notice what we get here. We get now here the vast majority of this. Oh, sorry, I'll redo that. Wasn't very good at all. What we get now is we get a significant proportion of our marks now coming from our AO3 skills. So it almost allows me to split assessment activities into 2 kinds. I can be doing sort of things which are non-AO3. Okay, so these would be things not, and what I'm saying there is not 8s and 15s. And I'm going to be doing AO3 type assessments. But even the AO3s include AO1s and AO2s, of course, by the nature of the fact they're essay questions. But I could be thinking about different kinds of examples of papers that I could be making to do that. Once we get into the next batch of questions, now for AQA, what we're doing here is we're doing now now we're doing skill acquisition. So notice here we are, I think I've bludgeoned that slightly, but here we've got that sort of first handful of questions which are very AO1 and AO2 focused, including that one there. But then, of course, what do we move into? We move into predominantly AO3. Same when I get down to this here. I've got my marks coming predominantly here from AO1, or coming from AO1 and AO2, and then predominantly from AO3 with some AO1 and AO2 included. So it gives me sort of 2 regimes. It gives me 2 times regimes of assessment that I'm going to be working on with these kids' assessment. Now, these are just some of the sort of the basic details that I would be talking about and considering. One of the things I want to show you before really getting into sort of more the delivery part of what I want to talk about today is I've just put on the screen one possible example of how we might look to actually put a course structure, a yearly structuring plan. Now, this relates to the same course, but I just want to draw your attention to some things. First of all, notice that when I am planning in this particular case, I am planning in 2-week blocks. So that there is one block. Notice that in my case, I've got 6 lessons in that block with a practical and a little assessment in there. But notice what I am targeting first and foremost in my lessons. I am targeting that skill, and a little bit of this because of the nature of the content. Through which material am I doing that? Through joints, through movement, through muscles. My first target is here, the skill. My conduit, my channel, my resource that I'm going to use to do that is the content. So I'm going to be building resources around that idea. If I skip to the sort of the third block of these, let's have a look in this kind of a yellow structure. Have a look at, for example, let me get this right. Have a look, for example, at this one here. This little block here, I don't know if I've got it right, but that little block there, we are doing, what we've got there is we are working for 2 weeks and we're working on the identify, illustrate, explain, how, and evaluate command. Of course, evaluate being really, really critical. And we're doing that with the CV system at rest and during exercise. So clearly there, folks, what we are doing is we're starting to build that other regime of assessment in, that other regime of skill development in there. Okay, couple of additional points that I want you to be really thinking about. I want to talk to you about lesson activities. Now, often as teachers, it's always like, well, yeah, fine, but how do I actually go about doing that? First of all, can I just address that I've got a really extensive sort of library of ideas and lesson resources in the blog, and I'm not going to go through all of those here, but I'll reference a few of those. So, a couple of things first of all. Given that we are arguing that evaluating and analysing 8s and 15s are the predominant assessment skills for students who are going to take our assessment, that to me would mean the following. That's an arrow, believe it or not. That to me means the following. I am going to decrease the amount of time presenting. Now, that's going to be a little bit controversial to some people. I'm going to stand at the front with PowerPoints and equivalent less. Why am I going to do that less? I am going to do that less because this is not in the skill basis that my students need for the assessment. In other words, where in the assessment scheme is there a requirement for students to absorb things from a teacher describing them to them? There isn't. Yes, it's a model and a mechanism by which we share information, but that is not going to develop the assessment skills that we need. So if we're not doing that, what are we doing? We are going to do additional time, up arrow time, on, and I'm going to put E and A. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean evaluating and analysing. In fact, it would be completely reasonable for you to say to me, okay, fine, James, how do we do that? Well, let me tell you. We do that because with evaluating, we would be doing things like agreement circles, check the blog. We would be doing things such as folded lines, check the blog. We would be doing things such as scale maps, check the blog. All of these are detailed. These are developing the behaviours and evaluation. When we are doing analysing, we are going to be doing lots of things such as idea piles. Again, check the blog, it's in there. These things build categorically these skills. That's why I'm using them in that lesson. Now, again, if people want to ask me more about them, perhaps we've got time and I could talk about those in a second, but I want to make sure we get through this. Secondly, I want to have up arrow, increase time, writing. Okay, so clearly writing, whether it's in the format of coursework or exam answering, is a critical skill for my students to engage with. So I'm going to do lots more writing. Now, there's going to be all kinds of formats of that. I'm going to say that is going to come from ES, Exam Simulator, where we produce work. That is going to be through past paper questions and mark schemes. This is also going to be through collaborative writing experiences. And I'll give you an example of this. This wouldn't be for assessment, by the way, but for a collaborative writing experience, we will be looking at something like a pass the buck experience. And again, if you're not sure what these are, please check the blog. I go over them in a lot of detail and provide it all for free in terms of the resources. But we're putting time into here, into here, into here, for example. Now, I want to dwell on time and writing. One of the real factors I believe is important here, and we mentioned it as one of the other skills, is time-restricted writing. Okay, could be drawing, of course, or calculating. Time-restricted writing. Whenever I'm doing an assessment, I want time restrictions to be built in so my students become aware of that and become specialised and practiced in that. Furthermore, folks, a couple more points. I want, for this particular course, lots of evaluation, I want increased amount of time conversing and debating. Again, I come back. Why do I want that? Because of the evaluative side of this course. Why do I want, how am I going to do that? I'm going to do that again through my scale maps, my agreement circles, my folded lines. I'm also going to judge it about how students ask teacher questions. How do they ask you questions? When was the last time a student said to you, "Sir, Miss"? I get it, but is there another side to this? "Sir, Miss," has anyone ever disagreed with that theory? "Sir, Miss," is there a contradicting idea to this? Why? Because they are thinking evaluatively. If a student doesn't ask you those questions, they are not thinking evaluatively. They are assuming that what they're being told is correct. They have to challenge. They have to ask those things. I will give you at some point James's classroom rules. That's a whole other conversation. And then, guys, I just want to reiterate this point here. I'll draw up here one of the things that I really want to increase time. And if I mentioned it already, increase time in lesson, English time in time restricted environments. Okay, now I do loads of mastery work with students, which is really open-ended time. But when we do assessments, I want lots of time restricted environments for those assessments to be actually real, to be equivalent to the real thing. Now, again, we can talk about those in all kinds of details, in all kinds of different ways. Okay, so lots of information there, but the critical point is, in my opinion, that in terms of the exam skills, I am targeting them specifically in my course structures. Here, 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 evaluate, analyse, evaluate, explain. I'm targeting them as the first priority of the lessons. Secondly, folks, I am basing them on clear evidence that those exam skills are relevant, and I'm doing it in the context of where most marks come from the typical types of questions. And in this particular case, I can also separate what we described earlier as two regimes of assessment. Okay, two regimes of assessment. And what I mean by that is it's very common for me in this particular course to sort of focus on AO1 and AO2 and then to focus specifically on AO3 type questions. Not only on AO3, because they incorporate AO2 and AO1 as well, but we have two regimes of assessment within these papers, and I have got to address both. I must make sure that both are overlearned by the students. I think that's all for now. Okay, there we go. Lovely. Hope that was helpful. Marta?
Yep.
Questions, thoughts, observations, comments?
Yes, I have a question. Can you please, James, give us a bit more detail or help us to differentiate between three of the activities you've mentioned, the agreement circles, folded lines, scale maps?
Okay, so first things first, folks. If you want real details on those, go to the blog. There's one called my 3 favourite evaluation activities, and they're there. Scale maps, by the way, just Health 1 and scale maps is called scale maps for some people. Sometimes people call it Convince Me, so there's 2 different names for that. So agreement circles in a nutshell. Group stood typically in a circle. Every student with a whiteboard, mini whiteboard, pen. You state something. I'll state something sort of, I'll say this one. The Olympic Games is has only positive effects on the host country. Okay, I'll say that one. And you can agree or disagree. Now, what happens is you repeat the statement as the teacher, you give a couple of seconds, and then students who agree with the statement step into the circle so they become more central. Students who disagree with the statement step out of the circle. As soon as they do so, a few moments of silence, they note down, I've stepped out because, well, he said country and I think it's really only good for the city. It's always, well, there's these negatives, could be dangerous to Atlanta Olympics, terrorism, So they come up with those ideas, then they can debate them backwards and forwards. And at the end of that experience, we get all of those great ideas onto a flip chart, whiteboard, and there we have it, and then we go and do some writing. So that's agreement circles. Folded lines, very similar. We get the whole group in one single line, we find the middle point, we bend the line like that, so you've got one student facing, one student here, one student, you often do this sat down, one student facing like this. And then on that side of me, I say to them, you guys have to agree with my statement. On that side, you guys have to disagree with my statement. You make your statement, let's say it's the same one, and then the people on this side have to find arguments for it. The people on this side have to find arguments against it. They're compelled into that position. They then debate and you record those ideas. Now, scale maps, or Convince Me, is a very, very different structure. Often done with tape, or you can just sort of do zones. But you create an environment where you get, let's say you've got a class of 20. It's all for evaluate this, by the way. Let's say you've got a class of 20. You would get some like 6 or 8 of the students participating at any one time and then repeat this exercise with different statements. But you would create this sort of like grid on the floor, or just use zones. You say the middle ground is completely neutral. One step either side is agree, disagree. Another step is strongly agree, strongly disagree, and then you can put others in if you want to. You make your statement, give a few moments, and then each person has to move to one of those lines. They can stay neutral in this case, unlike the others, but they move, and then you go and you use really smart questioning to go and get a debate going between that group. Meanwhile, the observers, maybe the other 12, they're note-taking, they're also judging the quality of the arguments that they're recording, the great points that people are making, they're getting positives and negatives and also, every time someone makes a point, someone might be compelled to move because it's a really good point. You can do that. It's a fluid one. So if you start all the way over there, strongly disagree or agree, whatever, you can gradually move and move back because someone's made a really, really relevant point. And if you manage that carefully, you can get really great conversations about more opinion-based, more evaluative, more strengths and weaknesses, and positive, negative type structures. So I really like that one. I do that one a lot in social cultural studies, but also in sports psychology, I do that one a lot as well. If you think about sort of like the nature-nurture trait, social learning sort of debate, it's a good one for this sort of thing. If you look at the different types of theories, whether it's arousal, regression, or anything else, you can get it really, have a really good experience with that one. But the students have to justify their positioning, and if they change their mind, they move to represent that. So it actually encourages the students to try and convince one another of their perspective, and it also allows them to consider whether their perspective is sound. One of the things I'm always keen with on scale maps or on Convince Me is, sir, no matter what anyone says, I stay here. I try and teach that or help that out of the student, because that's an ideological position. We want people to be receptive to information, receptive to movement, and that's that So yeah, those are the three that I would use. Kids love them. Would I do them on a Monday morning, first thing on a rainy day? Maybe not. Would I do them last thing on a Friday? Definitely. But they're developing the behaviours in this case of evaluating. They're not just, for example, teaching you here's the strengths and weaknesses. That isn't them evaluating. That's just putting stuff on a slide and telling it to them. We want them evaluating. Of course, we chip in and we make sure it's high quality. Those things. Any
Thank
other
you.
comments?
No.
Okay, I will mention idea piles, which is a really, really nice one for analysing. So to be clear, unless you're with OCR who've decided that analysing and evaluating are basically the same thing, I completely disagree. Analysing should be considered, break it into parts and explain it. That's really what it means. So how do we get that in an activity? So let's say we pose a 6-mark question on the board. We have students in consoles of 4 or 6, and on their little table, they've got 3 little piles, and the piles are broken into separate parts. So let's say I put a graph on the board, graph, however you say it, and I ask them first section, second section, third section, these little piles, and the students make their little cards and put them onto each pile, and then collectively as a group, they then decide which are the best points and then write a collective answer to the questions on the board. In other words, they separate the graph into section 1, section 2, and section 3, and there's those little areas on their table. They can contribute those ideas to their table collective, and then they can be developed from there as a collaborative response. Okay, Marta, I think we're all good. Anything further?
No, nothing else.
So quite theoretical today, guys. We're coming back to obviously in the near future, and we're looking at AO2 progression, and specifically EIO model, and then we're going to look specifically at extended writing, which of course will build on the principles we talked about today, and also in earlier in the week's data center session. So it's not quite the weekend, it's not quite Christmas, but it's close.
It's getting there.
And it's dark outside.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's the start of a song. What song is that? Anyway, guys, we really appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time. Sorry about the microphone mess up. No idea what happened there. Hopefully you managed to get a decent session out of it anyway. Cheers.